got some time for questions, but I know it's meant to inspire people to come on up and exchange more cards, because there'll be a lot of interesting people and ideas. Yeah, really good presentations, fellas. But maybe if I could ask our new panelists just to briefly take a couple minutes and just describe a bit about what you do. Christian, do you have a... Okay.
All right. I'm the first, all right. My name is Christian Bessler. I work for Kickstart Ventures as a vice president, but titles are not really important in the startup world where we're actually investing. So when you saw the previous slide from BDO that they don't take risks and they don't like challenges investing in startups, that's what we do. We take the full risk, the full hit. 15 out of 16 die, probably that's why I don't get a credit card from BDO either. We're part of, we're a 100% globe-owned entity. We belong to the Singtel Group. We're backed by Ayala, so we're part of the Ayala Group, one of the consortiums earlier mentioned. We have our fund one is like $2.5 million US. We couldn't really buy a resort with it, so we go a bit more smaller size on it, and we invest in startups, early stage tech companies in the Philippines or operating in the Philippines. Our bite size is between 100,000 to 500,000 US, and we made in the last, actually 24 months, because it's our birthday month as well, we're 2 years, we made around 17 investments into early stage companies.
Bravo, very good. Dustin Messina of IdeaSpace?
Yes, my name is Dustin. I'm part of IdeaSpace. IdeaSpace is a non-profit incubator that's supported by the First Pacific conglomerate, and we get funding from the different companies of Mr. Pangilinan amounting to $12 million for 5 years. And we're currently in the process of selecting our second batch of incubatees. During our first year, we received a couple of entries, 700, close to 700 entries, and currently we receive over 650 entries, and we're in the process of paring them down into 10. So we provide funding as well as incubation and advisory support. So that's IdeaSpace.
That's very interesting. We've got incubators at one end, all the way up to the biggest here with Ed. Please, Jeff Uthov, he's got an interesting story.
Pleasure to meet you all. Nice to be here. As Richard said, I'm appreciative you didn't tell any anecdote this time, Richard, so I'm pleased to hear that. I've been here 7 years now, guys. I'm a long-time old, low BPO executive. I've been all over the world. Almost 3 decades now in the BPO space. Came down here 7 years ago and have had some cool gigs. I was the CEO of IBM Docs Philippines for a couple years, ran an organization of more than 10,000 people, and then as Richard said, I became the president of TELUS International Philippines and was there for almost 3 years. One of the coolest BPO cultures for sure in the Philippines. And then I think the reason I was probably invited here today is because I made an interesting decision just a few months ago and left the safety and glamour of those highfalutin executive positions and took a 50% equity stake in it's all relative, right, but from my perspective, a very small BPO company in Cebu. And I'm in the process of moving my family over there. My wife's very happy because she's Cebuana. And I think that's a tribute, guys, to my belief in the very exciting days ahead for the Philippine economy and what I think is the resurgence of the BPO industry in a much more diverse way than it has been historically. And that's the reason I put myself in that position, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
Very good story. Do you have any questions from the audience? Yes, we do. Okay.
Please. From the back. Very good.
Hi, I'm Clarice, and I'm working now for a manufacturing company. So I guess this question was a little bit more suited for the first panel, but I would just like to get your ideas on, we discussed earlier about the risks and challenges of the ASEAN free trade community. And I was wondering, from a manufacturing perspective, or for a business owner's perspective, it seems that the Philippines has been the sweetheart for investments in the last few years, but that's all changed a little bit in the last couple of months. So private equity investors or funders, how can the Philippines stay competitive in terms of attracting funds, especially when we're a lot smaller in scale compared to other Southeast Asian manufacturers or businesses? I guess anyone could answer this question.
Who would like to, we have some, please, Ed.
Wait, were you joking by saying the Philippines was the sweetheart? Was that being, I guess, cynical? Because frankly, we're the bits, right? Our numbers are 1 billion. I think it was Hans' slide earlier. The 1 billion that we're having the last few months is the highest we've had already, but it's still one of the lowest. So we're not the sweetheart. Our electricity is so expensive. So we have no way to go but up. I
think I'm a big proponent of the Philippines, but I do think there still needs to be some consideration on some deep regulation. There is a very protective mindset here in terms of land, in terms of the energy sector. And I think it's one of the things certainly that I feel in the services sector with people. What we pay the people is still lower than most of our competitors, but unfortunately that also stops the burgeoning middle income from moving up. So I would rather pay less rents, less power bills, and more to the people, and I think we would see that acceleration happen quicker. And some of the deregulation that, the asset value here is certainly not something that the big guys are going to come in and buy up everything. The costs here of land and real estate is not cheaper fundamentally than it is in a lot of places across the world. So it's time to open up the markets, I believe, because I believe we can be competitive here. But until we do that, there's some resistance, I believe, for big private equity money to come in. And it's not Indonesia and some of the other, the big dragons that people are looking at putting together.
Okay, very good. Next question, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Ryan Castillo from Thomson Reuters. My question is, how do you see Philippines in terms of private equity and investors as part of the emerging markets, and how does the relationship of Philippines to other countries as well?
So how does Philippines compare to others in the emerging countries in Southeast Asia and elsewhere?
I can only speak regarding tech investments, and we're clearly lagging behind. If you look at foreign investors, they're all gang up in Singapore. One reason is really, as earlier mentioned, the regulatory framework is very limiting here. I think you're all aware of, if you raise capital abroad, foreign ownership rules. I don't want to even go that far and talk about land, because that would probably result in an uprising or something like that. But it's really foreign ownership is what limits big-time capital to come in my opinion, and it's easier to manage in Singapore. Incorporation, 2 to 4 weeks here. Singapore is you walk in an office, you get a number, and you're incorporated. You pay your taxes within 24 hours, and the government sends you a thank you letter. It's quite complicated here in Desert, so I think there are quite some efforts with Express Lane being done and all that stuff, but I've gone to a couple of incorporations, but still around 4 weeks. So we're getting beaten by other emerging nations simply by simplifying their incorporation and investment processes. Although I think that's one big thing that has to be taken up.
Maybe to add to Christian's point, in Idea Space, one of the values that we espouse and push our startups to actually imbibe is global ambition. So what we do is that from the very start, we tell them that they have to develop products that also address the problems of emerging markets. And we see that there's a lot of potential perhaps in the area of education, knowing that in emerging markets, 50% are young people below 23, so there's opportunity for our startups to actually develop solutions for the young people. So they're going to be the consumers of education, of contents related to training. So that's actually where we push our startups to think global in the sense of conquering somehow the emerging markets of 600 million people just around Southeast Asia.
Bravo. Okay. Okay, please, next question.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Glazel and I'm from Thomson Reuters. Since Thomson Reuters is a BPO company here in the Philippines, I just have a question with regards to this. Since BPO are considered as one of the drivers of the Philippines right now, of the economy of the Philippines, do you think that BPOs here in the Philippines are a good form of long-term investment which would help the Philippines in the long run? Or do you think it's just something that it's booming right now and eventually it will lose as it goes back to their mother countries?
I think I know the answer to that question.
So I'll start, and then I'm sure Darcy will have an opinion on that one as well. I believe there are so many intangible benefits of the BPO industry to the Philippines, besides it almost single-handedly creating the middle class over the last 10 years. It teaches young people how to run a business. There are so many people that have learned the fundamentals of running a business from the BPO industry that have then gone out and done different entrepreneurial things. So I think the BPO industry is just going to continue to grow and blossom. One of the really cool things that I've seen start to happen over the last couple of years is I spent a lot of time traveling back to North America, and there's an increasing appreciation for the breadth of talent in the Philippines. Used to be a couple of years ago, if you mentioned the Philippines, people either said domestic workers or entry-level kind of call center voice stuff. And now there's an appreciation of that you can get engineers, that you can get really sophisticated IT talent. And, when it comes with the English skills and the attitude and passion that Filipinos have, what you've seen over the last, Americans are a little smarter than everybody else, including Canadians, so Americans got it first. But it's really going around the world, and you're seeing now, Australians on a very large scale over the last couple of years. Canadians follow Americans, so they were pretty close right behind. But Australians over the last couple of years, lately it's been the Japanese that are looking over here in a very big way to leverage the talent. So as long as we continue to invest, diversify, build the right type of cultures where we treat people with respect and treat the basic business acumen to them, I think the future has never been brighter for the BPO industry.
Yeah, I think said well, and again, what we do see is an evolution, again, moving from commodity-based BPO services into, the value-add services. And, this is not about simply labor arbitrage, it's also about quality. And again, the Philippines has the talent to bring that quality to the table. And I think you'll see a move to what I call, rather than offshoring, I call it shared services. And what the Philippines can offer is really shared services for companies all over the world, and to provide the economic benefits of creating centralized services, and let's keep moving them up the value chain. So we took voice from India. We are now #1. Now we need to keep climbing that evolution, and ultimately, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to send out all the best talent to go start, working for startups in Singapore, to be Filipinos going to Singapore to do that? Why wouldn't it just happen here? But some steps to go.
Actually, one interesting thing, when I agree, it actually leads to a new generation of business leaders. Like the BPO industry actually drives the spin-off of new startups. There's one famous one, is Caliber, who actually, the guys were a startup or a startup BPO, which actually served Mint.com, Google, and so on, and then they repeated a business, and they actually thought the biggest problem with BPO is finding talent and assessing it and training it. So they spun it off a startup, and actually they raised big time money from Peter Thiel, which is the founder of Omidyar. And it's probably the second startup in the Philippines where they actually raised money from him. The other one is Lendo, which also is about credit scoring for BPO employees. And so the BPO industry is for me like a car manufacturing hub. It generates another generation of related business around it and fuels them with the rising middle class and so on.
Very good. You notice we had the pale faces talking about how great it is to do business with Filipinos in Philippines, so just a small thing. Next question, please.
I'm Trixie White. I'm an entrepreneur, and I set up Key2HR Solutions 13 years ago. My question is about lending to entrepreneurs. specifically those who are real startups where they have nothing, and they are given a hard time by banks or by banks. Maybe, well, obviously, 13 years down the line, we've now made a bit of a mark, and now banks are coming to us when we don't really need them anymore. And most entrepreneurs have the same experience as us. So how do we change that mindset? And I'm not only talking about people like me, but even more so in agricultural industries. I come from Mindanao, I'm from Mindanao, and I'm sure they need a lot of help down there on agriculture. But bringing it back to even here in Metro Manila, where entrepreneurs need a lot of help. So we're talking about Philippines wanting to help more entrepreneurs come and start up, and yet we find it difficult to actually start up. We don't have the right funding. I don't know who's going to answer, but maybe BDO can help.
Okay, Darcy gave me the mic. I will pass the floor to Metrobank. Yeah. No, but anyway, I have to be frank. I mean, I don't want to waste your time. You're right. Banks are, of course, some banks claim to have, all this Grameen type lending and everything, but the reality is it's difficult to lend to individuals. And that's why I had the slide earlier. When you lend to individuals, consumer finance, it's asset-based lending. It's really the large corporates where we really do cash flow lending, but without the track record, we'll lose our shirts lending to entrepreneurs. Look at this by design, or maybe not intentionally, look at the way we're seated. Highest risk startup, right, all the way to the lowest risk. It's interesting, right? Yes. It's by design. But there is a method to the madness. Look at the returns. They probably, and I think Darcy had a nice slide about the returns going lower, but I will be happy to make a return. The bond yields I do when I do a loan now, when we lend 10 years maybe at 5-6% coupon. You will probably not be happy making 20%. So for you have to get a return for the kind of risk you're taking. I'm not going to take startup risk, but I'm willing to take 5-6% so you can lever up your startup risk. So that's the kind of risk we're taking. The problem in the government now is unless the government guarantees or the government guaranteeing credit enhancements, why are you passing the risk to us? So what's happened for some of the franchisees, etc., then there's some sort of credit enhancement. But if you want us to take sole risk on them, we'll just end up lending to the large conglomerates. And that's why the large conglomerates have gotten bigger, because I will spend the same amount doing a credit analysis on a Metro Pacific or a PLDT or a Singtel than it is to you. And then I will end up losing 100% on a 100,000 peso loan versus a 10 billion loan. And even if I make 10 basis points here, but 10 basis points and 10 billion might be, whatever, 1 billion pesos. So where do I spend my time? So admittedly, that's the problem.
Ed's the most honest banker I've ever...
I have a job tomorrow.
Very good. I know, impressive though,
I might move.
Because you don't get that information. In other words, okay, another honest accountant.
I was just thinking, as a response to your question, and I don't know, Ed, if you can validate me on this, no? Is it possible that Trixie is not looking at the right level of bank? No? Earlier, I mentioned one of my clients, Philippine Business Bank. I mean, before they listed, hardly anyone heard of Philippine Business Bank, and they grew out of, their headquarters, as I mentioned, is in Caloocan. What's in Caloocan? A lot of successful Chinese businessmen who run import businesses or small manufacturing operations. No? And, it's still very personal. First of all, while they do have an approval system, the guy who ultimately will make the decision is Fred Yao himself. No? And he will ask about you, and based on his judgment, will say, okay, I'm gonna extend the loan. So it could be that not there would be banks who would be catering to your particular niche. No? And when I talked to Fred, he was saying, all these guys, the people I lend to, the repayment, the default rate is so low. Because somehow I know, I know about them. I know, I know their backgrounds. I know where they live. So, so that's just my 2 cents. There might be banks out there who would be catering to your market.
Good advice. Okay, please.
I'm Paul Martinez. I'm Group Chairman of Eastern Petroleum Group. We are in fuel distribution and small power development. I would like to address this to Noel. Yeah, Mr. Bonoan is the guy who had been on top of, second in command of BOF, Department of Finance. So he's got this macroeconomic exposure. I think there is no issue with respect to opportunities. A lot of opportunities, fundable opportunities that can give you 10 times, 12 or 18 times. It's not really hard to get those things. But I think Noel would know there are certain structural, defects, so to speak. Monopoly, oligopoly, those kinds of family-owned or politically, we call it before bureaucrat capitalism, when a political family controls, at the same time runs all sorts of businesses, you cannot just enter. One example is in retail. Some politicians control also the gasoline stations. And you will find it difficult, 1 year, even now, to open a station. Power plants, small power plants, that's controlled by the governor, the congressman, or whoever. So you have to, these are the things that you do not see as an investor sometimes, until you're there, until you start asking, why are you delayed? Because your zoning is denied. Why is it denied? Because you're going to compete with the other guys who run the cooperative running on diesel, even if you're going to charge half the price. So, Noel, you've been there as DOF. You have seen the struggles of entrepreneurs. You want to open up, I know. But the thing is, have you identified the roadmap, and have you had an influence on either the Department of Local Government, who oversees these governors and mayors? Have you tried some sort of an express lane that this is a priority program? The reason why Mindanao and Luzon has a deficit of more than 1,000 megawatt is because investors find it difficult, to put in even 100 megawatt because of all these obstacles. And at the same time, this is embedded, 18 billion every year is embedded and, in the so-called missionary route and universal charges that you and I are paying. 18 billion every single year. That's why our power cost is very expensive. Now, if you look at this kind of money, where there are inefficiencies, of course there are opportunities, right? And why are we the highest, in terms of energy cost as power? Is because of these inefficiencies. Now, you've been there, you have identified it in fact. Can you show us the way of whether you have thought of this? Libreng consultation. Thank you, Noel.
Let's hear this.
Okay, silence in the room. Well, no, you ask a very good question, and frankly, I don't have the answer. Look, but what's going to force all of us to be more efficient? Clearly, something as momentous as the ASEAN economic community will force us to be more competitive. Just the other day I was being interviewed, and I talked about that we have to learn to be efficient. This is a TV show, and the host is very blunt. You mean efficient, like people should stop paying lagay? And I said, well, yeah, that's a big part of efficiencies, all the frictional costs. Now, but just to put things in perspective, other Southeast Asian countries, with the exception of a very few, have also the same problems, are going through the same problems. I mean, in some countries, and I won't name them anymore, no, it will be difficult to do business unless you're in with the ruling party. So, you know, it's not something that's peculiar to the Philippines, and certainly it has to change, and hopefully the catalyst for this will be the ASEAN Economic Community. Let's see. No?
Very good and diplomatic too. Any more questions? Oh, okay, please.
Yes, Mel Corrigo. I'm in real estate services, but also I'm an entrepreneur. I've set up several businesses. One of them is that I pioneered a medical clinic in a mall in the 1990s. And actually, it was just a real estate venture. All I did was to chop it up and timeshare it to doctors. Eventually, it evolved into a ambulatory clinic. Now, healthcare is like a BPO starting to be outsourced. And medical healthcare, I believe, has a big future because the Philippines, by nature, we're good in caring, and there's a lot of culture of compassion here. However, we don't see the growth that's happening in that of Singapore, Indonesia, even Thailand, although now, of course, they're going through difficulties, or even India. Is anybody in the panel that can please help us in what vision should we take in terms of growing these? I'm not talking about hospitals like the Pangilinan group that's buying them. No, I'm talking more, specifically, we're planning a medical mall. And this is going to be a big ambulatory care, one-stop shop. Now, my concern is there a market that can top, say, foreign medical care in the Philippines? And if anybody can help us there, I would appreciate your answer. Thank you very much.
I'll take an attempt at it, not from an IT perspective, but because I stay in Singapore and also stayed in Germany for 2 years. And I speak maybe a bit from my own experience. Germany has a very socialistic medical system. And both the countries, Singapore and Germany, are going to go through in the next couple of decades the aging population issue. So that's one of the drivers why there was a very strong imperative to have healthcare established in the right way. What's also happened, and it didn't happen overnight, over the last decade or so, the government in Singapore has significantly invested in promoting healthcare and healthcare facilities, not just for locals, but also making them accessible to the immediate neighbors and to an extent also, I guess, to the ASEAN region. I think a large part of it is regulatory. That means you also, because the medical profession is a highly regulated industry on its own, but to facilitate that overall concept of end-to-end regulation and having some transparency in terms of how medical services are being carried out in the country and what people can expect, I think is a large part of it. The second thing is, from an accessibility point of view, they've really worked hard at establishing medical tourism in Singapore, which is kind of been the beneficiary of this. Germany, it works in a completely different way. When I was there for the 2 years, it's very socialistic. Practically every citizen has a medical card, and you can pretty much walk into any hospital, any doctor, and you just need to show the card, and there's no payment. I had an issue because I was on private insurance in Germany, and I asked to pay, and I wanted a receipt. And I had to spend maybe 2 hours in the hospital because they couldn't figure out how to give me a receipt, and that's basically part of the system. But it works very well for them, and it's established over the years. But that's a very internal system. It doesn't promote any form of, let's say, medical tourism or anything else, but it works very well as well. I think my perspective would be, one is to determine who the audience of the medical facilities would be. Would it be more for tourism? Would it be more for internal? So that's one approach. Secondly, in order to attract any of these audiences, I think there is a certain amount of regulatory let's say, input and hand-holding that's required to kind of promote it. My personal take is that I think it's going to be very difficult for any one individual corporation to potentially go after it. But I think if it's more of a consortium effort or if it's more of a government-driven effort, I think there's more chances of being successful.
I just have a couple comments relative to medical tourism, which I think some other countries are blossoming in that area. And I think it goes back to the kind of lack of education for the great talent that's in the Philippines. In the 7 years that I've been here, I had plastic surgery, reconstruction of my face, and I had major knee surgery. I had them both done here in the Philippines. And when I mention that to people in North America, they're like horrified that I had those type of things done here. And I'm like, okay, guys, half the doctors trained in North America, and you know, no issue. So I don't think there's a full appreciation yet, and I think we need to educate the world, as is the case in many areas, of the unbelievable talent that's in the Philippines. On a slightly different note, going back to the BPO space, I'm actually on the board of CCAP also, guys, the Call Center Association of the Philippines. I've served for the last 4 years on that board, and the medical industry is one of the hottest growing areas for sure. In fact, back to Darcy's points about the valuations, if you've studied the mergers and acquisition space in the BPO industry over the last half a dozen years, some of the highest valuations have been in the medical industry, and I think that's because of the great expectations for how that's going to grow significantly in the Philippines. In certain areas, I operated a center several years ago up in Nueva Ecija, Cabanatuan City, and literally in the morning I'd be blinded by the white of all the nursing students. So the amount of talent for nursing students and underemployed medical professionals that is in the Philippines will certainly springboard that forward in a very big way, I believe.
Very good. Well, we're okay. Okay. Very good questions, everyone. And thank you very much to our panelists. Really good information and really good presentations. So please, a hand for them.